Hello everyone, I am Tacit, and today I'm going to be going over the Gems of War event objectives for the Of Gods and Goblins event, in which the Priest of Nilbob is added to the game. So this week brings a Zhejian event, which of course has among some of the best stuff in the event key drop table, so definitely a great week to be going for event keys. Aside from that, it's a pretty tame week, with one main exception, and that is we might be getting a patch this week. I didn't normally get one out before the holidays, and this Tuesday is the most likely date, so very likely tomorrow night we'll end up getting a patch, so we'll have to look forward to that. If it's not this Tuesday, it'll definitely be next week's Tuesday. Anyways, let's start getting into this event. So as far as the Priest is concerned, comes in with a Yellow Purple Arcane if you want to stock up on it. As far as the troop itself, it's actually very similar to that of String Fiddler in a different way. So they're both in kind of the same category where they have a summon a green storm at start of battle, while still having a mechanic that is very support-based for a 4x Goblin team. In this case, this ends up giving a bunch of life to all allies, and then gives a barrier to all Goblin allies, which generally, if you're bothering to use this, will be your entire team, as you're likely using a 4x Goblin team in that context. And as all Goblins do, or most Goblins do, it gains an automatic extra turn. So this, unfortunately, while very, very strong, obviously 4x barrier for 13 mana cost with auto extra turn, very strong. However, Goblin teams normally have so much infinite loop already that giving some barrier and a bunch of life with no mana accumulation is generally not going to be good. The nice thing about String Fiddler is not only does he end up giving mana accumulation while also going with his Green Storm, but even if you happen to lose your turn by some chance, you would have silenced pretty much the entire team that can be silenced. So you would have gotten down 4 silences across the team, or whatever can be silenced, and then if they do get a turn, well, all they're going to do is at most like poke you with a skull or something similar. Like there's not much you could do. Whereas this thing, like, yes, you'll have barrier and stuff, but you're not getting any momentum. Like if you keep casting this, you're not winning any quicker. You're just gaining a bunch of life and you're just refreshing your barrier. And if you already had barrier, well, you just have barrier still. So it's not really doing anything if you're casting this like 5 times in a row and in a loop, because you don't need it. You can just replace it with any of the other many extra turn goblins. So while on paper this thing is really strong in premise, it is almost never actually going to get used, just because there's other goblins that serve a similar support role in an infinite loop team just better. And if you're already infinite looping, you don't really need the survivability necessarily. And if you do, you'd probably just go String Fiddler, since, you know, same trait, pretty much same entire setup, just slightly higher mana cost at 14, a slightly different coloration, and you just simply get better mana accumulation while silencing. So overall, in premise, it's good, but it's just going to be outclassed in most 4x Goblin teams, to the point where it is probably not going to get used. Anyways, speaking of the event key drop table, it is probably one of the most noteworthy things happening this entire week. So if you've been saving some event keys for a good event key week, this is definitely that good event key week. The first most noteworthy thing to mention, of course, is High King Iron Gut. If you haven't already picked this up, this is an insanely good Devour option. You can run it through the entirety of Underworld. The second you get a single Devour, you will have a 100% Devour rate, and then you just kill everything out. It can be a little bit annoying earlier on in the game to get your first Devour, because you might have like an attack of 30, 40, 50, but there's ways to offset it. You can set 3 seasons and have 12 additional attack. You can end up doing it in Underworld and other modes that naturally have higher attack values, where you'll have a higher chance to get your initial Devour. He's generally not too good until he gets that first Devour, so he can actually have upwards of 100 attack, but then all you have is a very good 100% Devour ability with auto extra turn. Only thing you have to do to pair with it is just simply have a curse option, or, you know, something that can allow you to get through immune to Devour, and you're good to go. It's ran for Underworld. It could be ran for most everything, though I'd say Underworld's probably its most noteworthy location, as it's a bit slow in many other spots. As far as what is and is not in the drop table, everything that is not in the drop table includes the 4 faction troops from Amanithrax and the Fool. The Fool is only in the Vault Key drop table. We just opened 1,000 Vault Keys last Saturday. But yeah, that is only in the Vault Key drop table, and of course the 4 faction troops are from the corresponding Amanithrax faction. But everything else that you see here is available. So that does mean if you want to get something like King Gob Truffle, you do have to do that specifically in the Amanithrax portals, and not from Event Key drop table, as that is one of the stronger things here. But honestly, all 3 mythics aren't really a miss. If you get any of them, they're pretty good options. Fairy Godmother, the best wish gem creator in the entire game. A bit gimmicky and can backfire, however, it's really good at giving your entire team full mana through alternative means. One thing that she's pretty noteworthy for is even if you're full mana blocking a troop, she can still feed it full mana. So that's kind of convenient. It's probably the most convenient way in the entire game to actually do such a thing, where even if you're using 2 things that completely overlap in color, she could still feed them to full mana, as if they weren't having mana overlap. Flaming Ani is just a general exploder. He just gets a lot of resummon, a lot of explode. He summoned Goblins, which is already among one of the better typings in the game, so he has a lot of value there. I personally don't use him too much, however, he is among one of the better ways to apply burning gems in the entire game, while still being an extra turn mass mana accumulator. It reminds me a lot of Wardbreaker, but instead of having damage, he has summons. So he's basically like a lot safer Wardbreaker that's used in not Wardbreaker, Wardbreaker, yeah. His Wardbreaker has an issue where it's like 30 mana costs, so it generally doesn't get used that often because it's kind of hard to kind of fit into a team. Whereas you can simply put this in, use Truffle or something else as your damage option, and have like a Truffle Flaming Ani combination. And of course, we just already went over Hiking Iron Gut. And aside from that, it just has a lot of good utility goblins. Like Toad Squeezer, oddly enough, he's used quite a bit because he's actually a goblin that has Impervious, which is pretty useful. If you haven't gotten a Black Beast, while he is not a goblin, he has a very interesting gimmick that can allow him to solo entire battles, which is always funny. Since you could devour your own team and gain a bunch of stats from it, and just a bunch of utility troops. Like every single goblin has extra turn pretty much, like extra turn, extra turn, extra turn, and even some of the not as good ones can still do a lot of value. Like Norbert Brothers, not as good in the current state of the game as it used to be, but it still gets so much value because of its auto extra turn. It's just a little bit too RNG to bother using, but ultimately, you're mostly looking for the higher rarity stuff. Most of the things that are extremely good on goblins are on the higher range. That's a good time to stock up if you've been looking to make yourself a 4x Goblin team. Also, Norbert's Turnip is in the Soulforge, which we'll be getting to in a little bit, and that's a nice way to kind of squeeze together all of the Goblins to make them work in a coherent team. But before we get over to that, actually, technically, when we go over that, we have ourselves the World event, and guess what our restriction is here? Well, it is nothing other than Goblin. So, yeah, might as well just go straight to the Norbert's Turnip thing. So, Norbert's Turnip, do not leave this week without it. It is probably the most relevant, not even probably, it is literally the most relevant thing in Soulforge that we'll have available all week. Definitely make sure to pick this up before the end of the week. It is pretty much the weapon for making goblins work. You've probably seen it in infinite loop teams in Guild Wars. So I highly advise getting yourself one, not just only to have for Guild Wars, but you could use it offensively as well. Most offensive teams are a little bit slower than what already exists for like Explorer 12 and stuff like that. However, it is one of several categories of infinite loops that are available within Gems of War, and definitely a great asset to have. As far as this team composition is concerned for this one, it's actually the cheaper team too. Has Toad Squeezer here because of Impervious. It's a Goblin that has Impervious, that alone just makes it already good. Norbert's Turnip just feeds a bunch of mana across your entire team. And one interesting thing about this, you might look at this weapon and be like, oh, that's just a standard weapon. It is not. It gains extra turn. It is one of only a few weapons in the entire game that gains extra turn. If you just look at this ability and you don't know what its little affix things are, you would think like, okay, that's just like a standard double gem creator. But it does gain auto extra turn once you have it all the way max. You do need the full max on it, but that's pretty easy to do. And yeah, it gets auto extra turn when you do so, similar to pretty much every other goblin. King Gob Truffle, just general good goblin, just full infinite AoE. He has an infinite loop off of Forest Troll into double Truffle into Greenstorm. However, you can also incorporate him into other goblin teams, in this case, something like this. And String Fiddler, which we were kind of mentioning, basically the superior version of the new trip that came out this week, mostly because for only one higher mana cost, you not only get to go into the coloration of your storm, so you're creating a rainstorm into yourself, you also get to go and silence the enemy while mana accumulating. And this is pretty relevant because if you happen to lose your turn for whatever chance, they won't be able to use all the mana because you probably missed because you ended up putting like a bunch of mana or misclicked something and now there's like a bunch of 5x on the board. Well, if the whole entire team's silenced, well, they can't do anything with it. That already got hit by freeze or something. Because that is one thing goblins still suffer with, freeze. It's one of the reasons why Toad Squeezer is used quite often because it has Impervious. I believe for this mode it's not really going to matter, but generally speaking, the Impervious comes into play quite a lot because it's immune to Entangle, it's immune to freeze most notably. So it's a way to kind of get past flash freeze and stuff like that. At least a chance to be able to do so. But anyways, yeah, it's just a goblin restriction. There's so many good goblin teams that you can end up creating. You just spam Truffle. You go something like this. You can go, I believe I showed something a little bit more offensive for the other one using Iron Gut. But there's a lot of ways you can go about it. As far as the room choice, just don't take Chimera and you should be taking the correct room. And it's pretty much all you have to know for the scoring, if you're just going for the basic battles there. Oh, also, we do have access to both skull damage and spell damage, which is one of the reasons I showed Iron Gut for the other one. I'll be showing in a little bit. And that's mostly because you have access to skull damage too. So your skulls will basically be one-shotting after you get a Devour. So you'll have an ability and skulls that will be one-shotting the enemy. Anyways, next on our list of things, let's go over all the weekly events happening this week. So, this Tuesday we're going to be having the Amanithrax faction event. So this is, of course, where Gob Truffle is from, or King Gob Truffle. Of course, you can get that whenever. It doesn't have to be during that event. However, you can pick that up then. Wednesday, we're getting the Goblin Pet bonus, so whenever you're using 3 or 4 Goblins on your team, you'll get some extra stats. Given that you're generally using that many Goblins whenever you are using Goblins, it's quite a bit of a benefit, just give them slightly more stats. Thursday, we're going to be having the Thief Hero class, which is the Goblin Hero class. It is arguably the best stealthy hero class in the entire game. You probably see Orb Weaver a little bit more, but that's more so because it's a really defensive hero class. This hero class is good both offensively and defensively. Has a lot of resummon potential, has that 7% insta-kill, a lot of things they can end up doing, and I would say overall it is the strongest extra turn hero class, generally speaking, so a good time to get some XP on it if you haven't already gotten it maxed already. As you having it maxed will have that extra insta-kill chance. And this Friday, unfortunately, we're going to be having an arena event, so nothing really much going on there. Also, as I mentioned earlier, which I didn't mention here, this Tuesday we might be getting a patch. If it's not this Tuesday, it'll be next Tuesday. So we'll have that to potentially look forward to. They're definitely doing it before the holidays. And of course, we have that other Christmas event going on next week, so it would make sense that they would do it before then, but we'll have to see. Anyways, as far as Soulforge, there is, I would say, 2 things that are really, really worth getting. One of them more so than the other. This one being the one slightly less so, but still a good idea to consider. So we have the Wild King. Wild King is an interesting troop. It's very high risk, high reward, but it gives you a lot of reward. It's good for modes where you don't care if you die, like for example Explore 12. So he enrages all allies and gives a bunch of attack to them, and then creates a mix of yellow and skull. He's very similar to Wild Queen, except Wild Queen's a lot better at not dying, but wins a bit slower. Whereas this wins at a very rapid pace, but has a high chance that you might lose a troop or two, which for a Guild Wars situation is a bit risky to end up doing. However, he has a lot of offensive capability because you can actually destroy your troops in order to do more damage. So he applies Enrage to your entire team while giving them all attack buff, meaning theoretically every single thing on your team is, assuming they're all at 1-time skull damage and don't have like a triple damage or some other kind of thing, they're all hitting for about the same amount of skull damage. However, they actually aren't, because your first slot, after it uses up its Enrage, will not have Enrage anymore, most likely unless it has some other perk that does so. And then you could end up using your next slot troop. So if your first slot ends up doing a bunch of skull damage, getting rid of its Enrage because it just took a skull, and then it dies because the excess skulls ends up picking it off, well, you then have Enrage already on your second troop, and your third, and then your fourth. So as things die, you still have your full attack value, you still have Enrage on the next one ready to go, even if the other one already used it up, and it can end up getting a lot of damage pressure. It also creates a Bone Storm at the start of battle, and can also be synergized with Wild Queen if you so choose, or with any other kind of skull spam team, depending on how you want to incorporate it. And I would say as far as mythics are concerned, is probably the one you want to end up considering. One other honorable mention is we do have normal Carandera. Of course, Enraged Carandera is also always in the drop table. However, normal Carandera is also available this week. It's mostly used as a curse option. It's a impervious curse. It's used pretty much entirely for that purpose. It does have like a empower to skulls, or not empower to skulls, but a convert to skulls, to doom skulls, while doing the doom storm and all that. However, it is almost entirely used for this curse option as impervious, so it's most likely not going to lose this, and it's just a really consistent way to curse. Most notably used with Obsidious, so you could 4x curse, 4x stun. However, it can also be used simply to curse with something like Elementalist Hero class, which has its own stun with a bunch of other effects that you'll be able to apply even if they do have impervious. So you could just simply go by it with curse and then go from there. Overall, it's a utility troop I don't feel like I use too often, but it's definitely one that's nice to have if you're starting to get later into the game, just to have for the sake of it. It's also generally considered stronger than Enraged Carandera in some situations. It really depends what kind of team you're building. However, Enraged Carandera is a 40% chance that will start when its turn begins. However, which is better if you're doing it defensively. But if you're doing it offensively, as in, you know, a team you're actively using, it's normally a lot better to be able to take a few extra turns, apply your curse, and then go from there. As it's just going to be more consistent than waiting a couple turns, as you could do this on turn 1 and have your curse ready to go. While this could also trigger on turn 1, there's only a 40% chance that it does, whereas you could try for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, however many you can get extra turns on turn 1 in order to go get your 4x curse off of this. Unfortunately, it's not guaranteed. Both of them are RNG based. But you have more chances, generally speaking, if you're using as your active team to apply 4x curse with Carandera compared to Enraged Carandera, so potentially worth considering if you're looking for utility. However, one thing that you should 100% make sure you get before the end of this week is Norbert's Turnip. We already mentioned it a couple times. We'll be showing a team with it, though I think I already showed the team that I ended up mentioning, but we'll show it again. But this ends up dealing, well, we kind of already explained this, but it has auto extra turn once you get it fully maxed. Aside from that, it's basically a standard, create a bunch of mana color. For this case, it's based on Goblins, so you'd use Thief Hero class with 3 other Goblins, and that's pretty much your team. You're stealthy, so you won't be targeted directly, so you always have Norbert's Turnip. You have the extra turn into spamming, so even if you miss the green to red creation, you're still going to be able to go and take it, get all your Goblins to full mana, cast them, and basically just have a infinite loop and you're just good to go. So if you're looking for a new infinite loop team or just want to incorporate it into ones you're already using, well, Norbert's Turnip's definitely the way to go. So definitely make sure you do not leave this week without it. Aside from that, there's like a few utility weapons here and there, but I would say Norbert's Turnip's the only one you really need to end up boring yourself with as far as weapons that are available this week, unless you're just getting other ones for completionist purposes. Anyways, without all that being said, oh, Trippy's ready. I guess we'll go and go over the teams real quick. So let's start from the top. All the way at the top. We have ourselves a Iron Gut version of the World event. So we do have access, as I mentioned earlier, to skull damage, so you can end up making a team that's a little bit incorporated around that. So in this case, we're just using a String Fiddler and Flaming Ani for mana accumulation while having extra skull support into a High King Iron Gut, where we're basically just going for using the skull damage more so than the cast damage in this particular situation. Then we have a pretty standard just infinite loop Goblin team. Honestly, I'm probably just going to mess with this one. This is the one I'm just used to using the most. And there's a couple different variants of this, but this is just one of the ones that I tend to prefer using it as. And it's basically a standard infinite loop Goblin. There are many, many, many different ways to do that. However, this just happens to be one of them, and it incorporates Norbert's Turnip as well, which is in Soulforge this week. So it's very easy to obtain as a cheap team. Next, we have the faction event, which is for Amanithrax, which will be taking place tomorrow on Tuesday. This will be a green-brown restriction. Keep in mind your hero weapon can be anything you want, though you can also make it of the color if you so choose. This is pretty much just a standard quick kill Rowan team for the earlier part, and then for the later part, I figured since High King Iron gets around, might as well also show one for him. Unfortunately, we don't have the High King Iron Gut Zugoff build for this kind of faction. However, you can offset with a curse. In this case, we're going for 4x curse with Fiendfire off of hero, and just simply doing it that way in order to allow High King Iron Gut to devour everything. You just simply get a Devour with him, and then he'll have over 100% Devour rate, and then you just simply devour everything because you would have cursed everything, and you'll be good to go. Just keep devouring, kill out the entire enemy team. He's in first slot, so you could take some skulls. A little bit riskier there, however, he does have 20% extra stats this week, so he'll be a bit bulkier than he normally is. And of course, Angry Mob's is here for mana, and Leprechaun is here for mana. As far as pure faction, it's a nice diverse team of 4 King Gob Truffles. There really isn't any need to run anything else. While he did get nerfed a couple years back to not have, I think it was, what, 16 mana costs or 17? And he got nerfed to 18, or was it 50? I can't remember. But whatever it was, it increases mana slightly to 18. This was a couple years back. This does make this faction slightly harder, but since then, we've also gotten a lot more stats. Of course, he has 20% bonus this week, stuff like that. So if anything else, it should be easier than ever to end up going and clearing it out. He won't be able to infinite loop since it's just him. However, he will be able to get down a lot of damage pressure, and as long as you have 3 of him alive by the time you're going into the final fight, you should be fine. Even with 2, you could probably still cheese it, though I would advise having at least 3 to have a really good chance of killing it out on the pure faction fight. Anyways, as far as Thief Hero class, this is the Thursday event. This is pretty much just feeding a bunch of stuff into Dawnbringer. You can do this with a similar weapon. We have access to Yellow Link, we have access to Red Link, as well as Green Link, so you could do it either way. In this case, we're going down the red route. However, you can end up doing it down the green route if you so choose, and just do it with an AoE weapon, kill them out. And String Fiddler is kind of just here for a little bit extra mana if we so choose. You could also go a third Goblin Rocket or something similar. And this final team, I actually want to go show, though not in PvP. This isn't really, it is a high risk, high reward team, so not necessarily one we would necessarily want in PvP. Though you could if you so choose. I have ran it for Guild War a couple times. Not this exact team, obviously, because it's not pure color. However, it can function in such a way. But anyways, as far as this team is concerned, we're basically just looking to get our mana accumulator started. So as soon as we do that, we just basically win. So we have just won. Earth's Fury, you don't have to use this. I just kind of put that there because it kind of fits his whole theme of AoE. However, you can put pretty much anything there. To a degree, Hero's mostly just there to tank. He's not even really here to cast. You could do like Rope Dart or something. The only concern with that is he gets blocked initially. But as you can see, we did end up losing our first slot, but that actually ends up helping us. Because as I mentioned before, as your first slot dies, like right now, for example, I do not have Enrage in first slot. So if he was to just die instantly right now, that would actually help us, not hurt us. Because everything on our team is basically the exact same attack value right now. So if we would have lost our Enrage, like right there, and he dies, we technically have more damage. Because our second slot still has that Enrage that we can end up proccing. So that's kind of like the whole gimmick I was mentioning earlier. And yeah, that's pretty much the whole premise. Just mana accumulate with him, cast him a billion times. You can put a web spinner up there. You can put a triple damage burning hero class if you kind of want to go down that route. You can do it any way you want. There's a lot of ways to kind of make him work. It is a little clunky to do on Guild War days. I have done it a couple times, but I would not necessarily advise it. Just because Wild Queen still feels like the safer bet when messing around with him. And this is mostly because she ends up reducing their attack. So if you are missing a bunch of skulls, which does happen on occasion, of course, where he just ends up missing and you just don't get as much value. When it does end up occurring, you know, you're going to lose a troop, and in Guild War, you're going to lose a bunch of score for that, which is not something you necessarily want. Whereas in something like Explore 12, we don't care if we lose a troop or 2 troops. As long as we're going quickly, we don't care how many die, we just care how quickly the battle is won. And he's decently good at modes like that. So very bad in like Underworld and like Guild Wars, even though you could use it in both if you so choose. But really good in modes where you're allowed to sack your options and still go quickly. This is things like Tower of Doom, Explore 12, your daily dungeons. Gosh, those things are actually starting to get kind of high. We should go make a dungeon video soon once we hit 20. Now that people are starting to get to that point. I'm still at 17 or 18, I think, on them. But gosh, the higher end is actually higher than Explore 12. And similarly, you can run similar teams for what you do for Explore 12 for high-level dungeons when you hit around that 15 to 20 range. But anyways, guys, that'll wrap it up for now. If you still have any other questions, feel free to leave in the comment section below. All the teams mentioned in this video will also be down there if you want to go and copy-paste any of them throughout the week. If you still have any other questions, definitely let me know. And we'll be back tonight to go do all of the Chapter 5 tasks and go from there. And hopefully tomorrow we'll have a patch. And if it's not tomorrow, it's probably next week's Tuesday, but it's very likely to be tomorrow. Anyways, guys, have a wonderful week. Catch you later, and thanks for stopping by. Goodbye, everyone. Thanks for watching.